When American planners entered World War II, they believed they understood modern warfare. What they did not fully grasp was how completely Germany had reshaped the battlefield. The Blitzkrieg was not just fast movement, it was a synchronized machine of tanks, infantry, artillery, and air power working as one. At its center were the Panzer divisions, designed not to hold ground, but to break it. German tanks did not advance alone. They punched through enemy lines while dive bombers screamed overhead, and motorized infantry followed close behind. This coordination shattered defensive positions before they could react. By the time Allied forces realized where the main attack was coming from, German armor was already deep in their rear. 4 American infantry units encountering panzers for the first time in North Africa and early European engagements, the experience was terrifying. Standard rifles were useless. Grenades required dangerous proximity. Anti-tank guns were heavy, slow to deploy, and often knocked out before they could fire more than a few rounds. Soldiers trained for conventional engagements suddenly found themselves staring down steel monsters they had no real way to stop. Reports from the field described men firing everything they had, rifles, machine guns, even pistols, knowing none of it mattered. Morale suffered. Units broke. Positions were abandoned not because soldiers lacked courage, but because they lacked answers. German tank commanders exploited this fear, using speed and shock to overwhelm defenders before resistance could organize. This unexpected imbalance forced American leadership to confront a hard truth. Their infantry was dangerously underprepared for modern armored warfare. If the United States hoped to stand against Germany's mechanized army, it needed a weapon that could put tank-killing power directly into the hands of ordinary soldiers. And it needed that weapon fast. As American infantry began facing German tanks in real combat, a harsh reality became impossible to ignore. The weapons they carried were never designed for this kind of enemy. Rifles, the backbone of any infantry unit, were completely ineffective against armored steel. Soldiers could hit a panzer 100 times and achieve nothing more than sparks and noise. The psychological impact was devastating. Firing without effect shattered confidence as quickly as enemy fire. Hand grenades offered little improvement. To damage a tank, a soldier had to get dangerously close, often within a few meters, and place the explosive in a vulnerable spot such as the tracks or engine vents. Under machine gun fire and supporting infantry, this was nearly suicidal. Even when successful, the result was often a mobility kill rather than complete destruction, leaving the tank's main guns still operational. Mortars and light artillery provided more firepower, but came with serious limitations. They required time to set up, clear lines of sight, and accurate coordination. Fast-moving panzer units rarely waited. German crews exploited speed and terrain, striking before mortars could be properly ranged or repositioned. In many engagements, American units reported that their indirect fire arrived too late or missed entirely. Field reports from North Africa and early European actions painted a consistent picture. Infantry had courage, but not capability. Every encounter with armor forced commanders into desperate improvisation. Roadblocks were overrun. Defensive lines collapsed not from lack of will, but from lack of tools. This growing mismatch created an urgent demand for a new solution, something portable, powerful, and simple enough for an ordinary soldier to use under fire. The U.S. Army did not need another heavy gun. It needed a way to give infantry a fighting chance against tanks. That urgency would soon give birth to a weapon unlike anything soldiers had carried before. The solution the U.S. Army needed did not come from traditional artillery designers, but from an unconventional idea, using rocket technology to give infantry explosive power without the weight of a large gun. Unlike shells fired from cannons, rockets could propel themselves forward, allowing a lighter launcher that did not require heavy recoil systems. It was a radical concept for its time. The breakthrough came when American engineers realized that a shaped-charge warhead could penetrate armor regardless of speed. Combined with a rocket motor, this meant a tank could be damaged by a soldier standing still. Experiments at Aberdeen Proving Ground quickly proved the theory. Early tests showed that even relatively small charges could burn through thick steel if designed correctly. The first prototypes were crude. A simple metal tube served as the launcher, with electrical contacts to ignite the rocket. Soldiers joked that it looked like a musical instrument, giving rise to the nickname Bazooka. But behind the humor was a serious weapon taking shape. In controlled tests, the launcher demonstrated impressive penetration, on paper at least. Field trials revealed both promise and problems. The rockets were sensitive to moisture. The electrical firing system could fail under combat conditions. Accuracy was limited, and the backlast posed a danger to anyone standing behind the shooter. Still, compared to existing infantry weapons, the bazooka represented a breakthrough. With German tanks already tearing through Allied positions, there was no time for perfection. Despite unresolved flaws, the weapon was rushed into production. The U.S. Army accepted risk in exchange for speed, believing that even an imperfect anti-tank weapon in a soldier's hands was better than none at all. The bazooka was born not as a finished masterpiece, but as a desperate answer to an urgent problem, an experiment carried straight from the testing ground to the battlefield. By the time the bazooka entered mass production, the United States was already fighting a war it could not afford to lose slowly. German armor was advancing faster than American weapons development, and the pressure to deliver a solution outweighed the need for careful refinement. Factories were ordered to produce launchers and rockets at speed, even as engineers continued to identify flaws that had not yet been fully addressed. Quality control suffered under the rush. Early bazookas varied widely in reliability, with some launchers failing after only a few firings. Rockets were often inconsistent, their performance affected by temperature, humidity, and rough handling during transport. Despite these known issues, shipments were sent overseas as quickly as they could be packed. Training was just as rushed as production. Many infantry units received the bazooka only days or even hours before entering combat. Instruction manuals were brief, and live-fire practice was rare due to limited ammunition. Soldiers learned the basics: aim at the side armor, keep clear of the backlast, and hope the weapon fired as intended. Veterans later recalled that much of their knowledge came not from formal training, but from trial and error under fire. Mistakes were costly. Some soldiers were injured by exhaust flames. Others discovered too late that a misfired rocket could leave them exposed while reloading. Yet despite confusion and fear, the bazooka was embraced out of necessity. It was the first weapon that gave infantry a sense, however fragile, of control when facing tanks. Even an unreliable answer was better than none. The U.S. Army knowingly accepted these risks, gambling that courage and improvisation could compensate for a weapon still learning how to fight a war. The bazooka's first true test came not on a firing range, but in the dust and chaos of real combat. In North Africa, American troops encountered German panzer units hardened by years of war. When the new weapon was issued, expectations were high. For the first time, infantry believed they finally had something capable of stopping a tank without calling for heavy guns or air support. Early encounters delivered mixed results. In several engagements, bazooka teams successfully disabled German tanks by striking side armor at close range. When the rocket detonated correctly, it burned through steel exactly as designers had promised. Word spread quickly among the ranks. Confidence rose. Soldiers no longer felt completely helpless when armored vehicles appeared on the horizon. But success came at a cost. Effective range was short, forcing bazooka operators to wait until tanks were dangerously close. Under machine gun fire and artillery support, surviving long enough to fire was never guaranteed. Many shots missed due to stress, poor sights, or faulty rockets. Some warheads failed to detonate at all, bouncing harmlessly off armor. As the fighting moved into Europe, new problems emerged. German tanks encountered there often had thicker armor than expected. In cold and wet conditions, electrical firing systems became unreliable. Field reports described rockets that refused to ignite, leaving soldiers exposed at the worst possible moment. The unexpected results were psychological as much as tactical. While the bazooka could kill a tank, it did not deliver the decisive advantage many had hoped for. It shifted the balance slightly, but not enough to dominate the battlefield. German crews quickly learned to identify and target bazooka teams, making their role among the most dangerous in any infantry unit. Still, those early encounters proved something vital. Tanks were no longer invincible. Even an imperfect weapon had cracked the myth of armored superiority. And that realization. What many soldiers did not learn until it was too late was that the bazooka carried dangers of its own. Official manuals mentioned technical limitations, but battlefield realities exposed flaws that training had barely touched. The weapon that promised safety from armored steel introduced new risks, often at the moment of firing. One of the most serious problems was the unreliable firing system. Early bazookas depended on electrical ignition, which frequently failed in cold, rain, or mud. Soldiers would pull the trigger and hear nothing. In combat, that hesitation could be fatal. Reloading under fire took precious seconds, and German crews were quick to exploit any delay. Even when the rocket fired, the danger was not over. The backblast, a powerful jet of flame and pressure expelled from the rear of the launcher, was far more violent than many expected. In confined spaces or trenches, it could burn, blind, or kill anyone standing behind the shooter. Several after-action reports described friendly casualties caused not by enemy fire, but by the weapon's own exhaust. The need to fire at close range made matters worse. To penetrate armor, bazooka teams often waited until tanks were within 30 to 50 meters. At that distance, one mistake meant instant death. The blast could reveal the shooter's position, drawing immediate machine gun fire or crushing retaliation from the tank itself. Veterans later recalled learning these lessons through painful experience rather than instruction. Some units adapted by clearing firing zones and assigning spotters to protect the rear. Others were not so fortunate. The bazooka gave infantry power, but it demanded precision, discipline, and sacrifice. Its greatest flaw was not just technical. It was the assumption that a new weapon could be rushed into war without fully preparing the men expected to trust their lives to it. Using a bazooka was never just about pulling a trigger, it was about standing your ground while a tank came straight at you. Veterans consistently described the same moment: the earth shaking, the engine roaring, the feeling that the machine was alive. German tanks were designed to intimidate, and when one advanced head-on, instinct told most men to run. Bazooka teams had to do the opposite. They waited. Often hidden in rubble, hedgerows, or shallow foxholes, they let the tank close the distance until side armor was exposed. At that range, escape was unlikely. If the shot failed, there would be no second chance. Real accounts from North Africa and Europe tell of soldiers gripping the launcher with shaking hands, fighting the urge to flee. One infantryman recalled watching tracers bounce harmlessly off a panzer while he counted the seconds, knowing his rocket was the only thing that could stop it. Another described the unbearable silence after pulling the trigger, praying the ignition would work before the tank's guns swung toward him. The psychological pressure was immense. Bazooka operators became priority targets. German infantry learned to identify the long tube and eliminate its crew quickly. Many soldiers admitted they were more afraid of being seen than of the tank itself. Yet again and again, men stepped forward. Some fired from burning buildings. Others waited until the tank nearly crushed their position. When a rocket struck true, the explosion was sudden and violent, but victory was often followed by shock rather than celebration. These moments revealed the true cost of anti-tank warfare. The bazooka did not remove fear from the battlefield. It concentrated it, forcing ordinary soldiers to face armored giants at point-blank range, relying not on technology alone, but on raw nerve and discipline to survive. German forces did not take long to recognize the new threat posed by the bazooka. Battlefield reports from North Africa and Italy quickly made it clear that American infantry could now damage tanks without heavy guns. While the weapon was far from perfect, it was dangerous enough to demand an immediate response. One of the first adaptations was physical. German crews began adding improvised armor to their vehicles, extra steel plates, spare track links, and eventually metal mesh screens known as Scherzen. These additions were designed to disrupt shape-charge warheads, reducing their penetrating effect before they reached the main armor. Though not foolproof, they increased survivability and forced bazooka teams to aim more carefully. Tactical changes followed just as quickly. Tank commanders became more cautious in close terrain, avoiding narrow streets and hedgerows where infantry could ambush them. German infantry was assigned to move closer to tanks, screening them from bazooka teams. Machine gun fire and grenades were used aggressively to suppress any soldier suspected of carrying a rocket launcher. German crews also learned to exploit the bazooka's weaknesses. They knew its range was limited and that a missed shot often meant death for the shooter. Tanks would zigzag, fire smoke, or turn their frontal armor towards suspected firing positions, daring bazooka teams to expose themselves. By late war, American after-action reports noted that bazooka operators rarely fired more than once before being targeted. The battlefield had become a deadly contest of adaptation and counter-adaptation. The bazooka had ended the illusion of tank invulnerability, but it had also triggered a rapid evolution in armored warfare. Each improvement demanded a response from the other side, proving that in war, no advantage remains uncontested for long. Combat feedback left no room for denial. Reports from the front made it clear that the bazooka, while revolutionary, was far from finished. Engineers and commanders studied every failure, misfires, poor penetration, short range, and turned battlefield frustration into urgent redesign. The most important improvement came with stronger rockets and better-shaped charge warheads. Later models delivered more consistent penetration, even against tanks fitted with additional armor. Mechanical ignition systems replaced earlier electrical designs, greatly improving reliability in cold, wet conditions. Accuracy improved as sights were refined and training emphasized proper firing angles. The launcher itself evolved. Later versions were sturdier and easier to maintain under combat conditions. Ammunition was standardized, reducing unpredictable performance. These changes did not make the bazooka perfect, but they made it dependable enough to trust. Just as significant was the shift in doctrine. Early on, bazookas were issued with little guidance. By mid-war, armies developed dedicated anti-tank teams with clear roles, supporting infantry rather than operating alone. Ambush tactics became standard, firing from cover, coordinating with riflemen, and withdrawing immediately after the shot. Commanders also learned that bazookas worked best as part of a system. They were paired with mines, artillery, and air support to slow and channel enemy armor. Instead of stopping tanks head-on, infantry focused on shaping the battlefield. By war's end, the bazooka had changed how armies thought about infantry firepower. It proved that small teams, properly equipped and trained, could challenge armored forces once thought unstoppable. The weapon's greatest legacy was not its design, but the lesson it taught: adaptation, not perfection, wins modern wars. The bazooka did more than give infantry a weapon. It reshaped the role of soldiers on the battlefield. Before its invention, tanks were nearly untouchable by foot soldiers. They dominated terrain, forced defensive lines to retreat, and dictated strategy. With the bazooka, ordinary infantry suddenly possessed a tool that could challenge armored supremacy, turning tanks from unstoppable giants into threats that could be countered with courage, skill, and teamwork. Its influence extended beyond World War II. Later anti-tank weapons, from the recoilless rifle to modern rocket-propelled grenades, borrowed directly from the principles the bazooka established: portability, direct fire, and shape-charge explosives. Militaries worldwide adapted tactics around these new possibilities, emphasizing small unit ambushes and combined arms coordination rather than relying solely on heavy artillery. The psychological impact was equally profound. Soldiers no longer felt helpless in the face of enemy armor. The presence of a bazooka team could slow advances, protect flanks, and buy precious time for reinforcements. Infantry units were empowered in ways previously unimaginable, giving them a strategic and moral boost that transcended raw firepower. Beyond tactics, the bazooka symbolized a larger shift in military thinking. Technology could amplify the individual's capability. It demonstrated that innovation, even in a rushed and imperfect form, could change the dynamics of war. Armies began to value weapons that were light, versatile, and effective in the hands of a single soldier, a concept that continues to influence infantry doctrine today. Ultimately, the bazooka's legacy lies not only in the tanks it destroyed, but in the confidence, flexibility, and strategic creativity it gave to the soldiers who wielded it. It transformed infantry from passive targets into active threats, forever altering the calculus of armored warfare and modern combat.